Welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today I have Dr. Lisa Strohman, who is a clinical psychologist, an attorney, an author, a mom of 2 teens, which we'll get into, and you specialize in the intersection of psychology and tech. Very interesting. So welcome, Dr. Lisa.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I'm going to call you Dr. Lisa because when I interviewed David Everett of GameSafe AI, he called you Dr. Lisa and I loved it. Listeners should definitely go listen to that interview with David Everett about gaming. But tell me, how are you involved with GameSafe?
So I was introduced to GameSafe and then jumped right on board because I've been in the space for so long and parents have asked for solutions. And so I was very quickly aware that his product and the ability to go in and give parents the right to see what was actually happening was so important. So I jumped in and started, just kind of doing some work and became part of the board, and I'm fully invested at this point.
Yeah, why don't we talk about just gaming for a little bit, because there's a lot going on there. There was a new report by Hindenburg Research. I don't know if you saw that on Roblox, saying that it's a pedophile hellscape for children. And it sounds like you had already kind of known that we need some additional protections on gaming. But in your work, what are you seeing around gaming? Is it safe for our kids to game? Like, what are the threats there?
I think Roblox, the report that came out and Roblox's response to it was kind of silly to me in some respects, because those of us in the field that have paid attention to this have known for a very long time. And it's not Roblox alone, but any time that you actually go in and you look at what an industry is doing, in this case with Roblox, they basically acquired a company that adults were using and then shut it down and force them all over onto the Roblox platform, which pushed those adults into, So if you look at the comments of the post that I wrote about it in my LinkedIn, Leo Croft, who is a professional gamer and has been in this space for a very long time, really brought that to light. And he would be a great person for you to interview as well in your podcast, because he really understands both sides of the picture. But Roblox is not like any other, it's not unlike any other platform. Minecraft, Fortnite, all of these devices and games that kids can go online don't have age restrictions. So adults are playing with kids and they're jumping into these spaces. And so you don't really know what you're getting on the other side. And so as much as I think it's fun for kids to be able to go on and play, we haven't set the boundaries right yet. And this is just indicative of the fact, this is very obvious to the adults in the room, how bad it's gotten.
Yeah. And the stories are scary, and the things that were revealed in that report, which I'll link to in the episode notes, and parents can look at that. But without appropriate boundaries to protect our kids online, is it worth it for our kids to be on there gaming? Like, is the fun worth the dangers that they could be accessing?
In my estimation as a parent myself, it was no. I let my kids have access to a game unit that we sat and played with, and that's the only time that we let them have it. But that's not what most parents are doing, because it's something that kids don't like, and they don't want that. But I'll give you an example of a case that I had with a 6-year-old who was a child of somebody that I actually had, a colleague that had worked with. And she basically came in and she said, something's happening with my kid. And every time I walk over, she does this and she moves her screen away from me and all of the things. When it turned out, she had 6 months on a different platform called Minecraft, this little girl at 6 was being not only sexually stalked and digitally exploited and traumatized. She was running around Minecraft, building herself house after house after house, trying to hide away from these people that had hacked it, that were on the server open forum, going after her. So it's really hard to unwind in a lifetime a 6-year-old's exposure to that. So to me, as parents, if they knew that was happening, why would you allow that to happen unless you knew exactly how to shut down those servers and do private servers always?
Yeah. And I advise parents, don't play online, have them play privately, but it's hard for the parent to manage that because the kid can find a workaround, right?
And it's not as fun. It's the same thing that I say with social media. In, when I go and speak on bigger picture, I look at social media and it's like, oh,
Hmm.
you should shut down your location services because we
Hmm.
don't want anybody to be able to track your children. But that shuts down the filters on Snapchat. It shuts down your ability to use Google Maps. It shuts down, so the
Mm.
industry knows that if you're going to do those things to protect them, that it's going to,
Not make it as fun. Right.
right.
And then when I spoke with David at GameSafe, he talked about you had opened his eyes to the addictiveness in these games. And so, putting aside the predators and pedophiles that are kind of using these games to get to kids, there's also an issue around the addictiveness of the gaming platforms. And can you just speak to that? How addictive are they?
They're highly addictive, and they're
Mm.
built upon the same premise, I would say, as the gaming industry in Vegas, right?
Mm.
There's their ability to go in and do this variable ratio reward system, which is the most highly addictive that you can do. And they do the same things with the rewards. They do these like little bits of like leveling up and earning loot and all of the things that they can do. And so the more that you can, quote unquote, kind of educate children on the things that they can earn, the more they want to do it. And so it's very, very innocuous seeming, but when you look at it in context with like what Vegas does, it's the identical pattern that they're putting in those games.
Okay. I want to switch to school devices for a minute because as you describe the addictiveness of the games on the gaming platforms, leveling up, earning rewards, it sounds a heck of a lot like some of the educational apps that my kids play in their classrooms on the iPads that they're provided. What is your opinion on the current state of tech use in school?
It's such a tricky question because I think
Yeah.
that we're in kind of this very unique space in history
Hmm.
whereby historic education was based on fund of knowledge. They wanted us to understand and learn historical figures, historic moments, all of those things,
Hmm.
and math, all of those things. Whereas our children now are growing up in a world where all of that is at their fingertips with the right search engines and with the right access to that. So schools are struggling with trying to keep attention to learn with
Mm.
that digitized short-term span of what is going to keep kids engaged.
Hmm.
So what schools are doing is trying to like again and what these programs do is they offer the schools a system. Schools are absolutely broke in most respects. They come in and they do these freemium models, and I watched one of the podcasts that you had talked about where an ad popped up in the middle of an educational thing. It's because schools are using freemium models
Mm.
versus paying for it and understanding that when you pay for something you can restrict things. And so it goes back to education, which is, in my other world of Digital Citizen Academy, that's what I do is I go and talk to schools and educate them on like what are those things that we need to understand and how do we shift it now before it gets far worse.
Hmm. Okay. Tell me about Digital Citizen Academy, and then we're going to talk about social media.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So DCA, as I call it, is just a program that I wrote K through 12. Has a peer program. It has a diversion program.
Mm.
It really, truly is my parent, mom, clinician response to I see the huge problem, and nobody's helping to
Hmm.
build it. So there's things like Common Sense Media or Cyber Civics, and there's other programs that are out there that schools go into and use, but most of those are run and built by marketing specialists, and the marketing is really more about selling the product, not about tracking, educating, improving the concept. So I wanted to
Hmm.
build an evidence-based program that we could actually track, that we could actually get the kids voices in, and so we're making them stewards and leaders in the space and getting them to have
Good.
voice in it. Yeah.
Yeah, bringing the youth into it. Obviously, we just can't have all the parents talking about what's good for
Right.
our kids without talking to them about it. And so, I've been trying to bring on more youth advocates that are talking about their experience growing up on
Yeah.
devices when we all thought it was okay, and now we kind of know it's not okay. So, I want to back up and ask because a parent had asked on Instagram about general screen time recommendations, and there's a lot of conflicting advice based on age. So what do you officially go with if you had to nail it down to what screen time per day is appropriate for kids?
So I would say on average, I would say less than 2 hours a day generally. for
Mhm.
kids up until the age of 4. I think that they shouldn't have any.
Mhm.
Well, 2, you're not supposed to have any, but I think it's closer to 4.
Great.
But if you look at why, and just to educate the audience a little bit, the reason why those metrics are changing is because these big organizations like the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, those big hubs that put those guidelines out there,
Mhm.
they tend to go through and look at trends. So it was super interesting to me when I saw that the APA and the AMA came out and said, we can actually allow more screen time because it's normative. And then they said that we actually have to have an expectation that teens are going to participate in sexting because it's normative. And that to me is when my line,
Oh,
like, and my, like, I just lost my mind because I'm like,
yeah.
just because they're doing it doesn't mean that we normative, like make it normative. Like
Mhm.
it goes back. So anyway, I just wanted the audience to
Wow.
understand, like when you're looking at those guidelines, a lot of times they're doing it because they're basing it on what's already happening versus
Mm.
what the reality of what's good is.
Wow, that's interesting. And not really good. Like,
No,
it's not good.
no, yeah.
Okay, so thank you for saying none under 4, because the more research I do and the more people I talk to, giving your kid a screen at those ages is so bad for them. And to tell listeners a little bit why it's bad for a kid under 4 to spend time with a screen.
So basically, what you're doing in those ages from 0 to 4 is really normalizing what attachment is for that child for life. So when you look at the part of like so perfect example, you have an infant, you bring it from the hospital, you put it in the bedroom, and it's got its own like crib. In the middle of the night, that baby cries. What that baby needs is an adult to come in to like react to their need. And so,
Mhm.
in securely attached individuals, it's when you have a problem as a child and somebody shows up for you, you learn that individuals respond to you. And if you compare that to some of the technology that's available today, so if a baby cries in the middle of the night and you have one of these digital like
Smart
devices in
cribs.
the smart cribs
Oh
that
my
pop
god.
up music and video on the screen every time
Oh
it
my god.
cries, the child now learns that their attachment is to a digital response. And so
Yikes.
every single time as a parent, when you do that, you're literally teaching them to be avoidant or ambivalent attached people later in life.
Wow. Okay, Dr. Lisa, I have been like avoidant of those smart cribs and I couldn't articulate why, and you just did perfectly. So thank you. I've
Sure,
been
of course.
wondering, shouldn't we go to them and not rely on that technology to soothe them? Okay. Wow. Okay. What about the fact that when our kids go to kindergarten or even pre-K at 4 or 5 years old, they're given a device to use in class? How does that factor into their overall screen time in the day? How do we manage adding that in?
So part of it, that's a great question because I think part of the issue that parents have is we don't really know how often they're using it and we don't
Mhm.
get a technology plan or
Right.
use plan from the
Mhm.
school. So part of that's what I partly teach is like in that original part when we drop our kids off and we sign that technology agreement for our kiddos in the educational system, I want
Mhm.
to know what is their plan? How often are they used? Are they one-to-one device? Do the kids have access to it? Like what is it that you're doing on your end to protect them?
Mhm.
Which is why I'm incredibly excited about David Everett's technology to bring into DCA because we're going to actually provide monitoring on those devices so that schools no longer have to question whether or not there's some sort of nefarious pop-up or something like that that's happening in these devices because we can't really go to all the different like educational media and say how are you managing this, what are we doing, it's so we're going to have to do it in a screen time thing. But I
Mhm.
think that as a parent, you have to ask that question, and can you opt out or not? And that's a
Mm.
struggle that most parents have because
Mhm.
schools really don't often allow that. So
No.
yeah,
No, but gosh, this is such a developing thing. I'm currently trying to opt out. And if did you see any of my videos about that
I
yet?
have. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So my opt out journey is ongoing, and I've been officially told that the California law does not allow me to opt out, and that my child would actually be getting a substandard education if there's not technology included, and that they have to provide the same education to all students and give them access to the technology as part of that. But my attorney has looked at what they pointed to, and that's not how she's interpreting it. So it's something that is not very clear because it's such a new problem for parents. What I've learned, it starts with asking the questions. Like you
Mhm.
said, what apps are they going to be using? How much time are they going to be spending? And ask the school, how are you guys keeping them safe from online harms? You shouldn't have to prove to them that there are harms there for them to then come back and say, well, we have this or that. They need to prove to you that it's safe for them to use. And that's going to be
Right.
difficult for them.
Right.
um,
And I
so,
think that the challenge is, right, technology can be so additive and helpful, and we're
mhm,
in a global economy where our kids need to understand it and learn it and be able to
mhm,
use it.
yeah.
But we're not actually doing that yet. So, I mean,
Mhm,
most of my public speaking now is about AI and how we're integrating that
mm,
into educational systems and talking about deep learning and deep fakes and all of those things. And like, we talk about like the dangers of it, but it can also be really helpful to take that and augment education and do that
mm,
as long as we are teaching them what that means and how it's being created.
yeah.
And you can take a classroom of 30 kids, and in that classroom, 5 of the kids are super gifted, 5 of the kids might be struggling, and you can educate them at their level, which is
Mhm,
amazing.
mhm.
But to your point, it's like we do have to ensure that they're safe when they're doing that.
Yeah. So when it comes to AI and starting to integrate it into the classroom, because that is happening, what should parents be worried about? Are there certain things we should be asking about or platforms we should not be okay with them using in the classroom? Like, what do you advise parents around AI at school?
I think that we have to really demand that the schools actually come in and do a deep teaching and learning about what AI is. And one of
Mhm,
the things that I use as an example is a website that actually has false information on it that was
mm,
created intentionally. It's the Tree Octopus website, and schools
mm.
use it all the time. If you Google Tree Octopus, you'll see a
Okay.
full website pop up, and it was actually created by someone to show that you could make something look like it was really real.
Hmm.
And when you use AI as an example, it's going into the entire internet source and taking that data. And so in the beginning, when AI just first started coming out, I used that and I kind of Googled, I was like, write me a report about the tree octopus that I can turn into my fourth grade teacher. And it
Hmm.
didn't really understand that it was a false narrative. And now it does. So AI
Okay.
is constantly learning, but we have to know that it's going out and looking at those sources, and it's only as good as it is teaching itself. And
Hmm.
so you just have to double check, fact check, and understand how you can use it and how you can't. And the other example that I give is with older kids. I sit down and oftentimes in real time when I'm doing presentations to teens, is I'll say, write me a report on the psychology of technology as Dr. Lisa Strohman would present it with references. And
Hmm.
it'll generate this whole thing. And I'll say,
Wow.
oh, this is great. Let's look at the references. And I'll click on the references, try to replicate it and pull them online. And the references aren't accurate or
Oh
exist at all.
no.
So it falsifies references as
Yikes.
though they're real. Yeah. So those are just two examples.
Yeah. Are we worried about kids losing their like critical thinking skills because the second for example, my son here at home, he'll have a question. We used to have Alexa. I recently pulled it because he was asking it all kinds of questions without having the time to think about it critically or maybe speak to someone about it and try to figure it out. So what are we worried about that?
I absolutely worried about
Yeah.
that. And I
Okay.
think it's like to your point, you feel it in your own home when that starts to happen.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm having a conversation with one of my teenagers and they're like, let me fact check that, like
Yeah.
versus like, having like respect for somebody who might have an expertise in something, or you're as a
Mm.
parent that you have that information. It also like on that side, like from a behavioral standpoint, teaches a lot of behaviors that can become disrespectful and in the world, and would not serve them well, as another issue in that.
Wow, interesting. And I could see my son totally challenging me on everything I say once he starts to understand that he can do that. I'm glad I pulled Alexa
Yeah,
for
good
now.
idea.
I know. Okay, let's talk about social media. Do you feel that social media, as it is now, is currently safe for teens to use?
I have 0% trust that it's safe for teens. And personally, and I'll tell you this, like, it's not an easy conversation to have in
I
front
know.
of families.
Yeah.
I have a 16 and 17-year-old, so I have a senior and I have a sophomore in high school, and neither of them have had social media their entire life. They're still alive,
Wow.
like they're still functioning
I can't
humans.
wait to hear more.
They may be two that you could interview on your podcast and get their
Yeah.
feelings on it,
Yeah.
because I know that my daughter was very uninterested in it when she was seeing those things. And she happens to be valedictorian of her class. And she's
Oh,
written,
Lindsay.
published a paper already as a high school student, and does all this research. And the time that she has, I think from that has afforded her that. My son was definitely is more social, is more kind of my personality, wants to meet everyone, and
Mm-hmm.
suffers without having it because he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't, for this basketball team, he's not part of those Snapchat conversations and those things that everybody else talks to.
Mm-hmm.
But he also has friends that like understand that about him, and they reach out to him and talk to him over iMessage and say, hey, this is happening. You probably missed it because you weren't in this group or whatever it
Yeah.
was. So they're different kids for sure. And I can tell you, if I go into a school, I can tell you which kiddos are on social and which ones aren't, just
Mm-hmm.
by looking at them. Their sexualization, their ability to communicate, their eye contact, they're just different kids. And so
Mm-hmm.
it just depends as a family and as a decision for yourself whether or not that's something that you want to support or not support.
Mm-hmm. And their activity on social media is leading them to become more sexualized, if that can even be used to describe a child, but and be
Yeah.
and avoid eye contact because they're constantly on these addictive platforms. So it's not like a good result having them spend time on social media as a teen.
Well, and they think more poorly of themselves. So there's higher depression, there's higher
Right.
anxiety, like their self-confidence and their self-esteem plummets because
Mm-hmm.
if you're comparing yourself to 4 billion people on a platform of your age group and you're not what they're doing, or
Mm-hmm.
even if it's fake doing,
Mm-hmm.
you feel bad about yourself. I mean, adults
Yeah.
have the same issue, but from a developmental perspective, and you look at what kids need, they need to go through these processes to understand who they are as a human. And if
Mm-hmm.
you're going out there, you have to be vulnerable as a kid to learn right from wrong. But when you have social media coming in and kicking you in the gut or in the teeth every time, you're
Yeah.
not going to do that anymore. And you're going to
Mm-hmm.
fall in line, and you're going to be a lemming like everyone else and do exactly what everybody else is doing in order to get the likes and the views and all the things.
Yeah. And I heard Dr. Mitch Prinstein, who he is with, he is associated with the American Psychological Association and some other or university, but he stated on a panel once that there's no actual data to suggest that kids suffer negative consequences when they're kept off of social media. In fact, often those are the children that thrive. Would you agree with that?
Clinically, I absolutely agree with it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the science behind it, and
Mm-hmm.
you look at the case studies that we have out there, if your viewers want to really dive into it, like the Molly
Mm-hmm.
Russell case in the UK
Mm-hmm.
was
Yeah.
so indicative of like, here's what I see as a clinician every day. So I
Mm-hmm.
would totally agree with that.
Okay. And I think I did a video on that case, so I will include that in the episode notes. There's also a discussion around whether or not social media is actually causing or one of the causes of the mental health epidemic our children are in, the rising rates of self-harm and suicide. So where do you stand on that?
So one of the issues that I present all the time is the CDC data,
Mm-hmm.
because it infuriates me when big tech goes in and starts testifying that there is no consequential evidence to show that. And
Mm-hmm.
again, like, I think it's using words against the society that doesn't understand the difference. A scientific study to be done generally is that you take two groups and you place one in front of a variable and one you hold back and you see if there's a difference.
Mm-hmm.
In the United States, there's never a chance that we would ever take a small child and put
Right.
it in front of social media and see whether or not
Right.
it messes them up. And
Sure.
therefore, every single data point is going to be correlational. And if you look at, and I share some slides with you, and I'm happy for you to share those two slides or whatever you
Yeah.
need to for your
Yeah.
audience. But
Yeah.
that CDC study shows very clearly the minute social media came out, TikTok, it was Instagram, Snapchat, and then TikTok, you can see the spikes in self-harm, depression, suicidality, suicidal thinking. And it is
Mhm.
very, very clear that it is related to each one of those units that our kids are going on.
Yeah. Obviously, I agree with you. I named my podcast Scrolling to Death, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not a clinician, but I just saw the research. And then are there specific differences you're seeing in how social media is affecting boys versus girls? And can you speak about that?
Yeah, that's a great question and interesting. I think that
Mhm.
pre-pandemic, I would say that you could see that it was very different for girls versus boys. Girls tend to have like a much higher use of the Instagram and the pictures and the
Mhm.
presentation of themselves, and so eating disorders, depression, anxiety, all of those things like really went up super high. The
Mhm.
suicide rates of girls was at 200% increase pre
Oh.
social media versus post social media. So it's
Mhm.
massive. And boys was at 50%. But when COVID hit, what was really interesting to me is I started to see more boys being impacted by the same sort of content that the girls were being impacted by. And so
Mm.
eating disorders in boys are going up, and it's not being talked about or observed very often in a kind of a public setting. But I
Mhm.
definitely think that if you look at some of the content that's coming through, like boys are like, I want to have a 6-pack ab and I want to do this and I want to do that. And, to me, I'm always like talking to teenagers. I'm like, girls, like you do not
Mhm.
want to date a boy with 6-pack ab. They're going to be in the gym all the time. They're not going to eat. You're not going to get popcorn at a movie. Like it's going to be awful. Like,
Yeah.
like you're taking away,
It's no
but
fun.
it's so fun. Like, why are
Yeah.
you doing that?
Right.
But little kids are getting like really tied into that, and then they start
Mhm.
getting these hashtags, and then that algorithm kind of takes them down that road. So
Yeah.
it definitely caught the boys up during the pandemic.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. And somebody asked on Instagram, I don't want my kid to go on social media and they're the only one. How do I explain to them why we've made this decision?
Such a huge problem, and I
I know.
totally my heart goes out to them
I
because
know.
I had the same issue.
Yeah.
One of the things that I say is find a parent or a person, somebody that you can say, hey, let's make a pact. As long as you have one other family that is
Mm-hmm.
willing to have that same policy as you, you're not on that island alone.
Mm-hmm.
And in my family, obviously in my community itself, I talk about this all the time, and
Mm-hmm.
I go into the schools, and so families know it, and my kids, clearly have like some sensitivity about it. But my son came home his beginning of his sophomore year, and that one parent that we had made that agreement so long ago,
Oh
without
no.
calling me, as we had discussed,
Mm-hmm.
gave her son Snapchat, and my son came
Mm-hmm.
home and he just fell apart and was like, "Mom, I am literally the only one now."
Yeah.
And it was just a really hard conversation for me to have, and like to really kind of give him, again, the statistics and the information and all of this. My kids know it, but it does really hurt when they're alone
Mm-hmm.
in that, or they feel like they're alone in it. So it's
Mm-hmm.
really having that relationship with your child that, you love them. And my line is always, well, I'm sorry, these other parents don't love their kids as much as I love you, or whatever, which
I
doesn't always
mean,
help, but
no, but it's kind of like when you think about if they spend 3 or more hours on social media, they're facing double the risk of anxiety and depression. So,
right.
and of course, they're going to spend 3 hours. They can't not spend 3 hours. We know they're spending 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 hours on social media a day. So, I'm not going to make that. I'm not going to make that choice for them. I'm not going to make it harder for them to thrive in through their teen years when it's already difficult for them, right?
Well, and I say that to parents. I'm like, okay, so explain to me like I do a holistic of review when I'm talking to a family or to parents
Mm-hmm.
or in presentations. And I'm like, okay, so, how many of you actually buy organic foods because you're aware of like the pesticides or the plastics in foods or whatever. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
all of you that are buying organic foods, how many of you make your kids wear like helmets when they're riding bikes or skateboards?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so you're doing all these things to keep your kids safe. And then you're handing them a device that gives them access into this like really nefarious world of like really bad
Mm-hmm.
actors and like harmful things. So it doesn't really make sense to me in that
N
space.
And I think that we're still kind of coming out of this place where we felt like giving them the device actually makes them more safe in some way, especially when we're sending them out to like walk to school. But I was talking to Emily Churkin. She has a book and she's the screen time consultant. She talked about how actually the thing that makes them most unsafe when they're walking to school is a device because they're staring at it the whole time. You see a kid walking to school with a phone, they're walking across the street looking at the phone, not paying attention to their surroundings. So in giving that device to keep them safe, you're not only not keeping them physically safe, but all of the online harms are coming at them through that device. It's
I
scary.
mean, the other thing that I would say, like a lot of times parents like come up to me and they're really sensitive about like when my kids is in that school and if there's like a shooting or a lockdown, like I want to be able to get a hold of my kid and my heart, like I get it, right? Like my
Yeah.
kids have been involved in lockdowns, but I trust my educational system to do what they're supposed to do. They spend
Hmm.
hundreds of thousands of dollars on threat assessment responses. And if I
Hmm.
tell parents, listen, like part of the reason I got into the psychology of technology was because I was at the FBI when Columbine happened. And I have intimate information understanding that in that scenario, several of those kids were targeted because they got on their phones and it alerted the shooter towards their location. So this is not a safety device for your kids in those scenarios.
Oh my gosh. I've been saying this, but I never knew there was actual data or examples to point to. Obviously, if
Yeah.
a kid is supposed to be on the ground in the dark and quiet, and then they get their phone out, which makes noise and lights up, they're going to be a target. So that's actually what happened in Columbine.
There is, yeah, footage of where you can see that it actually alerted the shooters because again, like the kids didn't know what to do. We didn't have that training 25 years ago, and we weren't talking about these things. The other thing
Mhm.
that happens also is kids start to share locations or post on social media from inside a lockdown, which alerts actually the shooters towards like which classroom they might be in, and it puts actually the response SWAT at risk because now you've got like them reporting live that these things are happening. So it's not a safety measure in any means to have a child have access to that during
Wow.
some of those very serious situations.
Wow. We need you at every like district board meeting where parents are yelling about how the phone's going to keep their kids safe. We need you to just say what you just said.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, and parents know most schools are trying to enforce stricter phone policies, even bell to bell phone bans where they're locking up the phones, and that there's been some great results in doing that. I'm sure you support that, I would assume.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I definitely think there's a, for your listeners, the London School of Economics in
Hmm.
2016 wrote a report called the Cell Phone Study.
Hmm.
And it actually takes over 300,000 kids from K all the way through, and it looks at their past academic performance and their
Hmm.
current academic performance. And the only change that they did in the study was take their personal devices away. And
Wow.
what you saw was that C and D level students went up about 12 to 14%. So
Wow.
those failing kids went into passing grades. The B
Hmm.
level went up about 8%, and the A level students went up about 4%. So the
Okay.
higher functioning your kiddo is, the less impacted they are. But again, the part that we're not seeing is that when you have a kid that is struggling and you let them have a personal device, you're going to continue to drop and sink their academic performance.
Hmm. Because it's so distracting. I mean, there's addictive apps on there sending them hundreds of notifications a day, sometimes thousands for some kids. And so, how could they pay attention? Of course, they can't.
And I don't think parents get to see what campus is like. You know, so if
Mm,
I go into a campus where there aren't cell phones allowed, say at lunch, it is loud. There's conversations happening, there's laughing, there's action, there's all of these things. When I walk into a campus where schools don't have restrictions, it
hmm.
is dead silent in the lunchroom. I mean, you can hear kids chewing, but nobody's
Ew. Oh,
talking and nobody's
right.
really communicating with each other. And the energy is just like zapped out of that
Oh.
in person, you know. So yeah,
Hmm.
it makes my heart hurt when we don't have those protections.
Yeah, me too. Okay. So if we're choosing, we want to keep our kids off social media. We believe that it's better for them to not be on there. How do we actually implement that? Because they can just get access on their school issued device or have a secret phone. I mean, is there a way to help enforce that you've learned or picked up through your experiences?
Yeah, it's challenging because with parents who have like the ability to monitor like through iCloud, you can lock down like the apps can't get downloaded. But if you have like a peer that's willing to like start an account for them and let them open it under their own account or things like that,
Mm,
you
yeah.
can't. Which is why with DCA, I'm very very adamant about bringing the children in as part of the voice, because if
Hmm.
you teach them the why of
Mhm.
course they're going to want to be better about like that piece of it. And if we
Mhm.
teach them that, the only reason why you're doing something is because you're being told that that's what you have to do, kids don't
Mhm.
like to be controlled. They don't like to have like lose
Yeah.
their independence in their industry. So we have to bring them in to want to be part of that in that space, because it's, as a parent, again, like, the new edition of the online device monitoring that we're going to have is going to help with the school devices through DCA, through GameSafe, like through the gaming portals. But really getting parents access to some of that on that full level is probably about 6 months out. And
Okay.
once it comes out, then you will be the first to hear.
Okay. Thank you. Yay.
Yeah.
Um, so when it comes to the devices, what ages, I mean, this is a tough question, but because every child is different, but what ages are you recommending children have a device, and what do those stages look like? Like what type of device should we start with?
That's a great question. I would say that if you can get through eighth grade without your child having their own device, the middle school years are what I call the dumpster fire years. You've
Mm,
got developing hormones, and you've got kids that are like don't have a frontal lobe developed. It's
yeah.
just messy. And
Yeah.
so get through eighth grade into high school is great. I always tell parents, do not give a device to your child as a gift. It shouldn't be a birthday or a holiday or any of those things. It should be a
Mhm.
random Tuesday, in the middle of whatever. And you say, you know what, I noticed that you could use this as a tool. And so I talk about using it as a tool, not a toy,
Yeah.
and say, this could be helpful for you to manage your this, and this. I want to help you with that. And so and I'm going to give you this device to use.
Mhm.
And there's privilege that to have that access to this device. And if you aren't aware of like the consequences of X, Y, and Z, then that device is going to come back to me, and we'll try again when you feel more comfortable understanding what the parameters are. But
Mhm.
to me, it's like it shouldn't be something that is their own. I have lots of parents who are like, well, my kid bought it themselves. And I was like, oh, I don't know why you would have signed the account then for them
Right.
to open it up, because
Yeah.
the other thing parents really don't realize is you're responsible. So these school shooting, threats that go out, and a school
Mhm.
has to respond, that's about $180,000 in a big school system.
Mhm.
And if your child is the one who created that, and they have a loss generated of 180,000, those
Mhm.
parents are now starting to be civilly sued in order to recoup that money, and it's your
Mhm.
account. So it doesn't matter that your kid's a juvenile. Parents are going to
Yeah.
start to see that more and more happening.
And I'm sure you're seeing a lot, like I am, of the kids using AI, generative AI apps, like Nudify apps to create nude imagery of other children, AI generated nude imagery, but realistically looking child sexual abuse material and then sending that around, or even someone else creating it, sending it to your child, them sending it off. Like they could be liable for that, and you could be liable for that as the parent because you can't be
Absolutely.
sharing CSAM.
Yeah. So, and that is both state and federal regulation. And so,
Okay.
one of the, depending on the state you're in, and whether or not their legislation has truly caught up to it. But
Hmm.
what I would encourage parents to understand is that if your child is actually caught with that, doing that, they could be charged with a sex crime. If they're charged with that sex crime, they could be required for life to be on the sex registry. And if that's the case, then that impacts them through job acquisition, through college attendance, all of those things that you're, again, trusting this 13-year-old with a phone and
Hmm.
hoping that they make the right choice without really truly educating them on that part.
And they're set up to fail because you have, I mean, Instagram was just promoting Nudify apps on their platform. So your kids on Instagram, there's all kinds of inappropriate ads coming at them. They think this must be safe for me. Instagram knows I'm 14 or something, and they download this app and use it. I mean, that it's something that piques their curiosity, and that's fine. Like that's normal. But by giving them access to this unregulated platform on this unsafe device, we're putting them in harm's way, and the consequences are very real, as you just described. What about watches? So would do watches are watches included, smartwatches, when you say wait till eighth grade or after eighth grade?
That's a great question. I think you have to ask yourself why it is that they need the watch.
Yeah. Right.
Is the watch really something that is helping or hurting? And so
Mm-hmm.
for me, like I for a hot minute had an Apple Watch, and the
Mm-hmm.
notifications and the distraction and the I guess the presentation of like being in a conversation with someone, something comes on your watch and you take it just a second down to see, hey, is this person
Yeah.
more important than you?
Yeah.
To me, just sets them up for failure long term. And I don't think
Hmm.
it's forever, but I think that from a standpoint of like kids specifically, I
Hmm.
don't see the benefit of them having something that allows them access to any sort of incoming. Now, the young kids, and again, I deal obviously in psychology and clinicians, like I've got a lot of parents that are divorced and you've got kids that are transferring between houses, and a lot of times they use a gizmo watch or one of those like really juvenile watches that allows them to call three people like mom, dad,
Hmm.
grandma, or whatever it is.
Mm.
And I understand that. I understand like giving them access in order to be able to identify or figure those things out,
Yeah.
which is very different, right? So it really dives down into like, what is the purpose of giving it to them and what are they going to use it for?
Hmm.
There's just so many things that I hear about: cheating on tests, sending inappropriate messages, like getting
Hmm.
disrupted in class. Like, parents are the worst, by the way.
Hmm.
Like that we're texting our kids during the day, like when
I
they're
know.
at school. And yeah,
That's what all
so
the teachers say. It's always the parent that's texting them in the middle of the day.
it is.
So I know a lot of parents are giving younger kids watches, especially if they're starting to walk to school alone or play up the street alone. Do you feel like that keeps them safe or is helpful for them in some way?
Yeah, it's interesting. Does the phone keep them safe? The phone is not going to keep them safe from somebody
Mhm.
driving up and grabbing your kid. Like, they'll have a
Yeah.
phone on them. And so if you're asking about tracking and digital trackers, there's a plethora of things out there, whether it's like rings or earrings or necklaces or things like that,
Hmm.
or keychains that you can put on your kid's backpack or on their
Hmm.
bikes or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
it's not necessarily the phone that keeps them safe, in the sense that if you have a family that wants a child to have a phone whenever they're leaving the house because they're in the neighborhood or things like that, I always say buy what I call a house phone. Buy an
Hmm.
extra line, have a device that is a house phone, sits on the counter, just like we have, an extra, and you can have them take that with them if they're going to go play at the basketball courts or whatever it is,
Hmm.
so that they use it just to go there and back, and you can track it through that if,
Hmm.
as a parent, that's important to you.
Okay. And maybe a flip phone even so that they can't download apps, right? Something like really
Absolutely.
basic. Yeah.
Yep.
The smart glasses, have you heard about these?
Mm-hmm.
So, did you hear about the Harvard students that developed some technology to be able to read? No? Okay.
Yeah.
So some Harvard students developed some software to put on top of the smart glasses, and I'll just send you this video after. But basically what it allowed them to do is they walk around and it scans people's faces and they instantly get a download of a bunch of information from public databases on their phone. And so they can take that information and go up to them and say, "Hey, Sally, whatever. I remember you
Oh my
from this
gosh.
place." And this video is so concerning because they're going up to strangers and convincing them that they know them. So my thought is like, just because we can, should we be doing this, like jumping into these new devices and throwing them on people without doing the due diligence of is it safe? So I don't know. What is your thoughts just generally around that?
Generally, that's terrifying, right?
Yeah,
Like, I
I know.
think imagine what that could be used for in
Hmm.
scenarios of stalking or people who are predatory or any of those things. Like, that
Exactly.
is absolutely terrifying. And imagine that you're just like looking at your friend and seeing who they're sitting with at a restaurant or things like that. And now you have like
Hmm.
this dossier on this person. It just like takes the lack of privacy to a whole new level
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
really is terrifying. I have not heard it, and I look forward to watching that.
Yeah. You have like Ray-Ban and Meta created a smart glass, and then you have Snapchat's spectacles. So these social media companies are actually leading the way on these smart glasses, which I find very interesting because they are the least concerned about our children's privacy or safety.
Absolutely. And I can see that they're, again, this goes back to, are they really only truly platforms anymore, or are they more than that? And are they like
Hmm.
doing things that really obviate any protections they ever deserved, which just makes
Yeah,
me even more frustrated. I'll be
it
posting on
does.
this later for sure.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and I mean, we won't go off on the tangent of the immunity shield that social media companies have and why we're having a hard time. Families who have been legitimately harmed by social media or maybe lost a child, why we can't sue these companies, or we try and we fail because of decades old laws. And so, something we're all fighting separately. Um, what didn't we cover that you feel like parents need to know? We went all over the place, but anything else on the high level around screen time, social media, devices?
I think the one thing that we didn't really talk about is parents themselves and their screen time
Mm,
use and
sure.
what they, kind of the example that we're giving to our kids and really truly understanding that attachment and that social environmental need that children need. It's such a very busy world that we live in as parents, and like in our family we had tech free Tuesdays, and
Mm-hmm.
it was really an opportunity for us as a family to really dive in and like have like board game night and cook together and do things that
Mm-hmm.
really just gave us quote unquote permission, I guess,
Yeah.
to see
Yeah.
that there's another way, and to slow things down a little bit and not
Mm-hmm.
be so pressed all the time, because I feel like our kids are overscheduled and we as parents allow that and we do it to them, right? We want them in music and we want them in sports and we want them to do well in school, and we don't as parents take a break and say, okay, are we really truly showing them by example how to be balanced holistic individuals, and are we
Mm-hmm.
showing them that we're not on our devices all the time? So I
Mm-hmm.
just think that that's really important to kind of take, we use the technology use continuum, and I'm like, I make adults take it with the kids when I have
Mm-hmm.
families in here, and I'm like, all right, looks like you all need a digital detox. Like let's talk
Yeah.
about how we're going to do that. So I
Yeah.
just think that that's one thing that we sometimes gloss over because we're like so focused on helping the kids, but the parents themselves have to buy in and they have to
Mm-hmm.
understand their own use too.
What are some tactics for parents to try to be more aware and intentional with our screens?
So one of the first things that I tell them is you have such a limited time with your kiddos. So if your kids get
Mm-hmm.
off school at 3 and they go to bed by 8, you have 5 hours, right? So if you're walking in the door from work and you're on your phone, or you're picking up your phone and you're doing work in between that 3 to 5 8 hour, you're basically communicating to your family and your kids like you're not quite as important as
Mm-hmm.
these things to me. So
Yeah.
really bookend those times and really try not to access it. And I get it. Like you might have a
Mm-hmm.
job that requires it because you're a neurosurgeon or you're on call or whatever the things are. I
Mm-hmm.
get that, right? But be really clear to your kid and say, like, I've got a case that I have to answer because this person just had surgery or whatever it is. But most of us don't have those kind of pressing issues, and we can put it
No.
off.
Yeah, we may think they're pressing, but they're actually probably
Right.
not. And I found the other day, I was like to my almost 9-year-old, I was like, I know I've been working a lot lately, and I just want to let you know I know that, and I'm sorry I haven't been as available. And she just seemed to really appreciate just the acknowledgement that I've been on my computer a lot. And not that
Yeah.
I'm saying like I'm going to be working less because I just have a really demanding job that right now I'm putting a lot of time into, and they understand that that's important to me and kind of what I'm doing, but just acknowledging it. And one thing that I heard that is really interesting is narrating when you use your device. So being like, I'm picking up my phone just to send this quick email, and then I'm going to put it down, or I'm just checking the directions to see how long it's going to take for us to get here. Like really annoyingly, but obviously, like, because they need to learn why we're using it, what we're using it for, and how it's a tool that they can use to benefit their life. But then it also, I think, highlights for us when we're not using it as a tool, because you don't want to say, I'm just picking up my phone to scroll through Instagram for 5 minutes. Like, that's embarrassing.
Right. Right. Right.
So thank you. Because it all starts with, I think, the parents and the mirroring the right behavior so that we're teaching our kids how to use tech responsibly. Thank you for all of this advice. So you have a few books, right? You have a couple
I
targeted
do.
towards adults and then one for kids. Can you tell us about those?
Sure. So I have the first one I wrote was Unplug, Raising Kids in a Technology Addicted World. And my
Mm-hmm.
father promptly said that it was more like a pamphlet because
Mm-hmm.
it was only 90 pages and it was very
Oh,
simple.
I
But it was some,
appreciate that though.
yeah, I know, right? So that was the first one. And the second one that we did was released during the pandemic, and it was about Gen Z. So it was really more
Mm-hmm.
kind of indicative of it's growing up on, it's called Digital Distress, Growing Up Online. And it
Mm-hmm.
truly is like really in the space of, okay, how do we as a community understand this generation that has never not known being online? And so
Yeah.
it's very in depth in terms of the different things that you can find on there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one was just a fun book that
Mm-hmm.
we did for littles. That's usually, it's pretty good for like the little kids, like 2 to 5, which is called Phone Alone. And it's about
Yeah.
how a phone kind of takes over and manages it. And I gave you a QR. And if you want to put the
Yes.
link to free books for your listeners, if you
Oh,
push
thank you.
it, I'm happy to do that. You don't write books for money in this space. You write them for cause. And so
Right.
I'm
Okay.
happy for your listeners to get access to that. So,
Okay, I will include that in the episode notes, and that one's called Right Phone Alone, and I'm gonna get a
mhm.
copy because I have a 3 no, she turned 4. Oh god. So,
Ah!
okay, thank you so much for everything. This has been such an interesting conversation. We went all over the place, so I feel like I'm gonna tap you when we get more something happening that's specific to any of these topics, and thank you again. Thank you again for
Absolutely.
everything you do.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. Appreciate
Yes, of
it.
course.